The Battle of the Hidden Graveyard, Chapter 4, First Part. They didn't understand this at all. Though the stagecoach should have been moving straight ahead, it kept changing direction, which was mystifying to both Belbo and the Rains and JJ. And there was only one thing they did know, the fact that they were being pulled back into Sinistra's hidden graveyard. The wrathful spirits of Duke Sinistra's children, resting in the graveyard, steered the fresh sacrifices they desired toward themselves. Even Louise realized that, and she told JJ to try to escape again. The former hunter shook his head. "It's no use. We'll only wear out the horses. Nothing to do but make our stand here." "You can't be serious. The sun will be going down soon. There's no telling what'll happen then." "I only know one thing. If we run, it's just gonna pull us right back." "I'm with him," the coarse Belbo interjected. "He's full of fight, but that's just the flip side of his fear," Louise thought to herself, seeing right through her deputy. "So long as we've got what's-his-name, Dorliac, they can't just blow the whole damn stagecoach away," Belbo continued. "So we all lock ourselves inside it and use him to negotiate with the enemy. Tell them that if they don't want him killed, they'd better let us go. If they don't, we'll chop his fingers off one by one and finish off by taking his head, and our job is getting him to the capital unharmed," Louise said, flatly rejecting her subordinate's savage proposal. "At any rate, let's see what kind of move the opposition makes. We'll only use him as a last resort." No one voiced any objection to that. From the look of things, that was because they knew this was the only thing they could do. But even knowing, that there were some things that couldn't be avoided. Harmon had just said he had to answer nature's call, and there was no bathroom on the stagecoach. On stagecoaches traveling the highways of the frontier, where there could be a full day's ride between stations and way stations, it was customary to use the facilities at the station first. But when unavoidable, passengers could get out and relieve themselves by the road. "Can't you hold it?" "No can do." "Why didn't you go earlier?" "Actually, I did. It's just I'm so nervous now." "Then there's no way around it. Just do your business close to the vehicle." "Yes, ma'am. Although, I'm kinda sheepish about being on my own." "Sheriff, would you mind tagging along?" "What are you talking about, you deviant?" Claire bugged her eyes, and Louise blushed in spite of herself. "I'll go with you," Belbo suggested. "No, I've got it." All eyes turned to the second volunteer, Lance. "I'm due for a pit stop myself. Perfect timing. My shoulder isn't bothering me anymore, so leave this to me." Louise made her decision quickly enough. "Okay," she said. "Watch yourselves." Getting the stake launcher from her, Lance stepped down from the stagecoach with Harmon. As they circled around to the back of the vehicle and did their business, Lance never took his eyes off the blacksmith. Less than 5 yards lay between them. If anything were to happen, the deputy could race to his aid, and their vinyl raincoat shielded them perfectly from the rain at least. The rain. Suddenly, Harmon's form grew hazy. "Oh shit." Lance turned around. He was done answering nature's call. He went 2 paces before halting, then called out Harmon's name repeatedly. The blurry form had vanished, like a picture obliterated by the rain. Louise and JJ barreled out. On hearing what had transpired, the sheriff sent Lance back into the vehicle, called for Belbo, and they searched their immediate surroundings. But they didn't find any trace of the man, as if he'd melted in the rain. 20 minutes later, there was nothing more they could do but return to the stagecoach. JJ was the first to notice. "Where's Claire?" Only a liquor bottle remained in her seat. Al's eyes went wide, and he replied, "What are you talking about? After you called for Belbo, you came right back in. Then you told Claire there was something you wanted her to see, so you let her outside. Didn't you?" By you, he meant Louise. They checked with Lance, and he agreed with the farmer. Even JJ was at a loss for words. "So while we were out searching, a second one taken." In saying that, JJ fell silent again. Louise knew the rest that he hadn't said. Their side was holding one. This was about exchanging hostages. "I'm going out to look for them," the sheriff declared. "It's no use. I can't just give up on them." "Forget that, and start giving some thought to what you should do when the enemy asks us to make a trade," JJ told her. "I'll go out and search. But it's an ugly situation. But don't look away from it. You've got to shoulder all of this. You can turn over the kid to save the other two, or decide to do like you stated right at the beginning. But don't put that burden on anyone else, okay? You and you alone have to make that call." JJ exited the stagecoach. No one said anything. They all knew the weight Louise carried. But a voice rose in the silence. "So what will you do?" As Dorliac looked up at her from where he sat on his stool, it appeared that a smile had risen on his lips. Even when the sheriff's bloodshot eyes were upon him, the servant didn't seem upset. "Will you abandon me, or will it be the two who vanished? Either will be fine with me." "Shut your trap," Belbo shouted, turning the stake launcher that way. "The next time you shoot your mouth off, I'll end you before we even get a chance to hand you over. If you do that, it'll be the end of you all. If the lot of you want to stay alive, you have to stay with me. Duke Sinistro really is incredible. This is his checkmate." "You SOB." Lance had anticipated how long it would take Belbo to lose his temper. More than his finger going for the trigger, it was the man expression that gave it away. That was the face of a man wore only when he was about to murder someone. The gaze became fixed, the humanity drained from the expression in an instant, and... now. Lance's hand went for the barrel of the stake launcher. The stake of ash. Launched by the pressurized gas, was thrown far off course, rebounding down by Al's feet. Cruel as it may seem, no one paid any attention to either Al or the errant stake. The shooter, the one who'd interfered with him, and the sheriff were both staring at the window on the left side of the vehicle. And that was where the death rattle that had thrown off Lance's timing had come from. "All of you stay right here," Louise ordered them before disembarking from the coach. The door was shut immediately. Clearly the scream had come from nothing human, and at present anything non-human had to be considered the enemy. Who'd it been slain by? JJ? Dark forms took shape between the gravestones up ahead of them. There were 4 of them. The one on the far right and the one on the far left ran all the way there. It was Claire and Harmon. "You're okay, right?" The 2 of them bobbed their heads repeatedly. Their faces were tinged with fear, but also there was a definite excitement. And was that rapture? Each of them looked as weak in the knees as if they'd just met the love of their life. While that was understandable in someone as emotional as Claire, Harmon was moonstruck as well, and looked ready to whisper professions of love to anyone, even the bar girl. What had happened? The other two figures would know the answer to that. One of them, on the right, from the sheriff's perspective, was JJ. On the left was a man in a wide-brimmed traveler's hat who wore a long coat blacker than the darkness and had a long sword across his back. But what was the thing that dangled from his right hand? It fell at Louise's feet. The man on the left had tossed it there. Like the one the day before last. Split in two lengthwise. It was the same sort of winged beast man JJ had cut. Down back at the Mihail station, the rain was washing away the fresh blood that still gushed from the wound. That's what was manipulating the stagecoach, said JJ. It never occurred to me it was coming from the sky, but even if I'd known, there wasn't anything I could have done. If not for him, we'd still be unable to escape this graveyard. It's true, Claire said dazedly. You came and called me, but the second I stepped out of the stagecoach, my head suddenly got fuzzy, so I just followed along after you. The next thing I knew, there were two of you standing in front of me, and Harmon was there too. I thought he must have been tricked too, but I just couldn't make myself fight it. Then those two versions of you suddenly turned into a young couple dressed like nobility, and they were just about to bite our throats. And at that moment, a scream seemed to come from the sky. And there was a spray of blood, and that thing fell to earth. With that scream, Harmon and I snapped out of it, and those lousy nobles took off. And then he came floating down from the sky, Harmon said, his voice lilting like he was reciting poetry. The hem of his coat spread like a gigantic bat. Oh, it was beautiful. And there you have it. By the time I raced over, the two of them were already with him. Said he had no business with us, so it would seem he was looking for the graveyard. That being the case, he said he was in our debt, and I brought them back to return the favor. Allow me to introduce him. JJ no doubt intended to tell them the new arrival's name. However, the man gave it himself. D. His voice echoed in Louise's ears. A name so cold, so beautiful, and so sad. I'm Louise. I serve as sheriff back in Happy Gringo. The sheriff caught herself trying to scrutinize the shadowy figure's face. Its contours were blurred, the line of his nose. That was all she could see, yet it had a strange effect on her. Her heart was hot and racing. Please, she thought, let me see it all. They have problems with the rain, you see, he said in a voice like steel. They'll take off. I'd appreciate if you could stay here a little longer. How long? About half an hour. Roger that. It's the least we can do, what with you breaking that spell over us. Of course, even if I said no to you, the passengers would be sure to mutiny. Louise shot a glance at Claire. The woman was so busy gazing at the new arrival, she forgot to show her displeasure at the sheriff's catty remark. The bar girl had her hands folded together over her chest. Thanks. The shadowy figure turned right around. Louise had to fight a desperate urge to follow after him. Just 30 minutes, she said in an absent-minded tone that was swallowed by the sound of the rain. While it was nonsense talk, it was also a vain spell from the bottom of the heart of a foolish woman who wanted to once more glimpse a gorgeous dream. First part end. Second part. He returned to the spot where he'd cut down the winged beast man. 4 or 5 yards away there stood a false spring tree. It leaned to the right more than the other trees, and a testimony to the magic Dee had worked. This species of tree was unusually elastic, and Dee had used his monster strength to bend it, and then secure it with a wire wrapped around the trunk of another tree. After lying flat on his back against the bent tree, the hunter had cut the wire and been launched into the air. Timed so that he'd intercept the winged beast man flying overhead, his rough handiwork had miraculously succeeded. Having lured Dee into the graveyard along the stagecoach, the spellcasting scout had outlived its usefulness. All that remained now was to pinpoint the graves of the young nobles and destroy them all. Dee put his left hand to the ground and asked, "Can you track them?"
The sound of the rain isn't helping, but yeah, more or less. Head east by. Southeast.
Following the hoarse voice's directions for about 5 minutes, he came to an enormous gate of what looked to be marble. There was nothing beyond it, just the gate. Though it would have been simple enough to go around it, Dee knew very well that doing so wouldn't allow him to meet with those he sought. He pushed the gate with his left hand. A terrible chill coursed through his body. His left hand must have been doing everything it could to stem the flow. There was power leaking through here. It wasn't a form of magic. Rather, it was a physical form of energy generated where 2 dimensions came in contact with each other. In Dee's world, it would be a source of destruction. All his functions froze, and the instant Dee came into contact with this death and destruction, he ceased all resistance. As his body headed toward death, his left hand sent out a single thread of regeneration to connect them to the real world, and while Dee moved into another world. Stars came into view on the other side of the gate, and they were constantly changing, with a transient orphan star being swallowed by a nebula, one moment only to be transformed the next, into an enormous planet that filled his entire field of view. What's more, they existed both without and within Dee. In various forms slipped past the hunter, or else cut right through him. That was how they appeared in this world, but in Dee's they would have taken the form of defensive systems, various weapons, or carbon-based constructs, such as people and animals. Through this extremely dangerous space, Dee floated, reduced to a lifeless corpse. Length, width, and height didn't exist here, nor did the flow of time. And Dee himself simultaneously existed and didn't exist. Perhaps somewhere in the process of creation was the Dee J.J. had glimpsed as a distant figure on a cliff, or the one who'd rescued Claire and Harmon in the rain. After a few 100 million years had passed in this world without time, Dee finally ascertained that a group of coffins existed at the heart of a defensive system in an enormous nebula. As he approached, the nebula glowed weirdly, its very light trying to destroy Dee, but all of its attacks were drawn down the connection to the hunter's world, and expelled in the space between the 2 dimensions. Connection to the hunter's world and expelled in the space between the 2 dimensions. It took another 100 million years to reach the center of the nebula, and there at the center of countless geometric patterns, Dee finally saw 3 coffins.
There they are.
The hoarse voice cheered.
That's Sinistra's oldest boy and his daughter. Hurry up and finish him off. Man, this has been one long trip.
Drawing still closer, he entered the heart of the geometric patterns. Though the bizarre shapes attacked him relentlessly for the next 1,000,000 years, Dee made contact with the coffins. The attacks were intended to kill him, but Dee was already dead. The instant he made contact, Dee's return connection pulled him back into his own world. As soon as he was revived, Dee got up. For the few seconds since he'd opened the gate, he'd lain there, reduced to a corpse. About 15 feet ahead of him were 3 wooden coffins in a row. Each one was faded, cracked, and covered with moss, making manifest the cruelty of the one who'd buried them, as well as the despair of those in turn. Dee drew the blade from his back and walked toward them. Pale hands burst through the lids. Rising from the boxes in luxurious garb were a boy and 2 girls. Their faces were so brimming with youth and joy, the hoarse voice actually murmured,
"Kinda feel sorry for him."
The young man stepped to the fore, saying,
"We knew you would come. Dee, I am Riara, firstborn son of Duke Sinistra. I shall face you. Will you not spare my younger sisters?"
"The job was for the 3 of you," Dee said in a voice that was soft, but still carried a ring of iron to it.
"We were sealed in our graves by our father, yet we had to go on living. Is there something wrong with that? Human beings take the life of other creatures to stay alive, do they not?"
It was clear Riara's heart held nothing but sincerity in his wish for his younger sisters. The young man, who could have been described as the crystallized beauty of youth, was probably willing to take Dee's blade right through the heart at that moment. In another universe, I saw the trillion geometric patterns that surrounded the 3 of you. Or perhaps it was all just a dream. But of that trillion, 1/10 of a tenth were the corpses of humans you drained of blood, and not just to live. Riara's eyes gave off blood light. His mouth snapped open, revealing horrid incisors. In another universe, I saw the trillion geometric patterns that surrounded the 3 of you. Or perhaps it was all just a dream. But of that trillion, 1/10 of a tenth were the corpses of humans you drained of blood, and not just to live. Riara's eyes gave off blood light. His mouth snapped open, revealing horrid incisors that spoiled the elegance of the nobility. Short swords slid from either sleeve to rest in his palms. The horizontal swipe of Dee's blade changed, clanged against one short sword, which Riara then hurled through a strange twist to the wrist. The sword spiraled down Dee's blade, and then shot toward the hunter's throat. Giving off a sound of unearthly beauty, a dagger in Dee's left hand intercepted it. The short sword continued to spin as it shot through empty air, embedding itself in a stand of trees towering to Dee's right. The trunk of the tree it hit twisted. Dee bounded. Gambling life or death, there was no hesitation in him. When he had come within about 10 yards of the young nobleman who'd kicked off the ground before him, the hunter hurled his dagger. It pierced the young man's heart, and when he landed, Dee was right on top of him, lopping off his already decaying head. While in midair, Dee saw indications that the younger sisters intended to flee. Before bisecting Riara, he had thrown a pair of wooden needles. Once he confirmed Riara's destruction, the hunter ran over to the girls. All he found there were gorgeous dresses with stark wooden needles stuck in their backs.
"Decoys, eh? Can't have gone too."
Before the hoarse voice could finish, Dee sank in muck up to his waist. Pale female hands had touched his right ankle and pulled him down. From the ground to his rear, the other girl appeared, a knife glinting in her hands. A blade poked from her back, and was drawn out again. It was a backward thrust of Dee's sword that he'd made along his left flank. Disregarding the girl, who slumped forward, Dee drove the sword into the ground before him. Bright blood spread across the rain-lashed earth. The hunter's body quavered slightly, and a heartbeat later Dee was standing on solid ground. The mud that caked him from the waist down was coming off in the rain.
"You put him down,"
the hoarse voice said pensively from the vicinity of the hunter's left hip.
"Sure was a long trip, though. Grand total of 300 million and—"
Dee cut in there, saying, It was a dream. He looked down at the girl. Her old dress seemed as if it had seen a mind-boggling number of years. The way the pounding of the rain quickly tore at it, unraveling it, and turning it to dust just like her body. That, too, was immediately washed away in the rain. Dee whistled for his cyborg horse. JJ and the sheriff were standing out in front of the stagecoach, and the spray of rain beating against their raincoats felt like a relentless fusillade of bullets. Seems like you've wrapped things up, eh? Dee nodded at JJ's remark. That, and no more. When the Black Rider and his steed spun around and started off, Louise barely managed to swallow what she was about to say. Won't you come with us? She knew he wasn't the kind to respond to such a plea. His work was already done, and the sheriff had set out again. They probably had half a day's ride left. Still, at the moment Louise frightened herself, wishing with all her heart she could rely on somebody else. Though the rain hadn't let up yet, the rapture and curiosity boiling within the vehicle made everyone forget all about the weather. In the rapture camp were Claire and Harmon, who kept repeating his name, and stared off into space with starry eyes. And the curiosity focused on the sheriff and her deputies' attempts to milk JJ for information about Dee and his activities. JJ ignored all questions regarding Dee. The only information he imparted was when he told the sheriff and her men that they'd once worked together. But even regarding that job, he would say nothing more. He behaved like a believer trying to defend some holy sacrament never meant to be shared. An illustration by Yoshitaka Amano. An illustration by Yoshitaka Amano. True to form, Claire alone said, "What if you got some special agreement between folks in your trade that you won't spill each other's secrets or something?" And the bar girl had intended to dispense further ridicule, but apparently she remembered a certain someone's face, looking toward the heavens raptly with starry eyes. One. True to form, Claire alone said, "What, have you got some special agreement between folks in your trade that you won't spill each other's secrets or something?" And the bar girl had intended to dispense further ridicule, but apparently she remembered a certain someone's face, looking toward the heavens raptly with starry eyes. Even the sheriff and her men were so surprised they didn't pursue the topic further. At that point, it was Dorliac who asked rather abruptly, "You said Dee, did you not?" "Yeah, that's right," Balbo replied, being sociable for a change. "You know him or something?" "No. But that name, Duke Sinistra may have made in mention of it. I can't really recall." "Are you sure you really don't remember?" Balbo asked, wearing his animosity on his face. "You're not just clamming up when it's convenient now, are you? Hey, when you get to the capital, they ain't gonna be as gentle with you as we've been. It'd be a lot easier for you if you just spilled it now." Lowering his voice, he continued, "Come on, fess up. Were you Sinister's little butt buddy?" And though Dorliac did no more than look away, everyone else around him reacted. "Grow up, deputy dipshit," Claire snarled. "What are you, some kind of sadist? You getting your kicks teasing the kid?" "I'm with her, knock it off, Balbo." "What the hell, Lance? Trying to make yourself look like the good guy here? You falling under that weird spell's what made us half a day late for hooking up with the reinforcements." "Sure."
That hunter seems to have taken at Sinestra's play pals, but don't go thinking Sinestra has thrown in the towel. Until we know exactly what his connection is to this clown here, I don't want to spend another stinking minute bumping along in his buggy. In his own way, Belbo was trying to change the mood in the vehicle. The enemy still had them in checkmate. They couldn't afford to get soft now. Okay. You and Al can get some rest up in the regular seats. I'll stand watch over him, Lance said with a smile. JJ and Louise were up in the driver's seat. Belbo looked up at his co-worker, then spun around forcefully and headed for the door. Al followed after him, and Lance squatted down by the cage. Dorliac, who'd been looking down, suddenly opened his eyes. "Don't raise your head." Lance mouthed the words to the young man, not making a sound. And Dorliac got the message loud and clear. "Duke Sinistra hired me, and he means to get you out of here. Just relax and follow my instructions." A certain light glowed in Dorliac's eyes. Second part end. Third part. D. The call followed him across the wilderness. D halted his cyborg horse. A lone gyrodyne descended from the jet blackness of the rainy sky. Not making a sound, the purple conveyance hovered to D's right, not 3 feet away from him, and about the same distance off the ground. It operated by magnetism. A door opened and a steward in a tuxedo appeared, saying, "Master D, I presume." It wasn't so much a question as a confirmation. "I am a servant of Duke Sergei V. Sinestra, administrator of the 9th Sector of the Western Frontier. Dorliac B. is my name." The steward's face and voice were both those of the dashing young man. "It's an android," the hoarse voice said, its words mixing with the rain. "I disposed of your master's children not long ago. Is this about that?" D asked, his voice low but imbued with a far from gloomy edge that deflected the rain. "No. My master himself stated that you have done well. Those children dragged the lofty name of the Sinistra clan through the mud. He said destruction was long past due." "I haven't been asked to hunt your master, however." The machine shook. The rain bouncing off the android from head to toe had actually become like a mist due to its fear. "I'll thank you not to confide in my man any further. I shall converse with you." The voice that was heard from the depths of the gyrodyne was clearly synthesized. "Although this is our first meeting, I have heard your name before. D. As a vampire hunter who makes no attempt to hide it, would you be so good as to accept an assignment from me?" "Your Grace," said the android who wore Dorliac's face, turning a look of astonishment toward the doorway. "Never fear, B." If others had been there to hear that reply, it undoubtedly would have filled each and every one of them with wonder. The tone the Duke directed toward the mechanical man was brimming with affection. "When I accept a job from a noble, there's one condition," said D. And the rain suddenly intensified. "I accept that," Duke Sinister's voice replied. Like D's, it was low and murky. "Let's hear your request." "Many thanks, D." What sort of conversation then transpired in the rain? By the time the gyrodyne took off without a sound, D was already galloping away through the rain. 3 hours to Gasburg, Louise announced from where she was riding. "Shotgun." "No, 3.5. JJ corrected her as he lashed the horses. The rattle of the wagon wheels mixed with the sound of the rain. making it impossible to hold a conversation without really raising their voices. Details, details. Is it because you're a hunter? That's got nothing to do with it. Besides, I got out of that game years ago. Why? Didn't anyone ever teach you there are some things folks just don't want to talk about? I guess you're right. Sorry. The world remained behind a fog, and evening was closing in. Sinestro would probably resume the chase shortly. Would they be able to reach Gasburg first? Anxiety cast a black shadow over Louise's heart. I got scared. Just one remark. And to the sheriff, it seemed almost muttered. What's that? Louise asked. Starting out, I was so full of myself. I was born with an unusual constitution, and an expert from the capital even gave me the seal of approval as being suited for work as a hunter. Despite reflexes, strength, and bone resilience far above average, JJ still got hurt a lot. But according to him, even injuries that should have been life-threatening healed in a day or so for the most part. Around the age of 5 or 6, he was doing hard manual labor like lumberjacking, and going out on projects clearing forests. And when it came to fighting, the toughest guys in camp had nothing on him. You'll wind up a vampire hunter, they all declared with bloodied faces. And the next thing you know, that's what happened. At the age of 16, he'd left home in search of a vampire hunter, preferably a middle-aged one, and he was over 20 by the time he found one. The hunter wasn't exactly top class, but for 3 years they traveled all over the place. Ultimately, his mentor fell victim to a noble, but he taught JJ the essentials of being a hunter. It took less than a year for JJ to distinguish himself. I thought I was top class all around, physically, mentally, and my weapon skills. And the first time I put down a noble in the eastern frontier, I got messed up pretty bad. But I forgot about it soon enough. After that, I started having fun getting rid of them. Well, that was when I ran into him. He was referring to the other hunter, and the one he said was called D. The two of them had taken jobs to get rid of the same brutal nobleman, who was infamous in the western frontier. With less than a week to accomplish this task, JJ found his pride and confidence crumbling by the day. The nobleman was far more powerful than JJ, yet D had dispatched him with consummate ease. None of JJ's swordplay could reach the nobleman, and at the moment when JJ felt fangs pressed against the nape of his neck for the first time in his life, D raced in. Deflecting the nobleman's attacks, D's blade flashed out, and every time it did, the noble lost a piece of his anatomy. When that noble put his fangs right here, I wet myself, no lie. All D's skill did was rob me of all my self-confidence. And yet, JJ had found the other hunter 10,000 times scarier than the nobleman. He drove the noble back, step by step. Now this was one cruel nobleman, so that was really no surprise. He'd snatched over 1,000 kids in that region. If he drained them of blood and killed them, or else turned them into fellow nobility, well, that still would have been better. But all the kids had been locked in a chamber in his castle, and kept alive to use in his medical experiments. On top of that, he was giving them some kind of special nutrient shots that kept them from dying. So when the sword went to work and his right hand was taken off, then his left arm, I was feeling pretty good about that. The point, I started to think, are you serious? Was when this defenseless nobleman had lost both hands, got stabbed a bunch of times in the gut, when his legs got hacked off, Every hair on my body was standing on end. The nobleman begged for his life. He cried out that he'd give him all the treasure in his castle if he'd just let him go. And he shaved off his nose. He carved the mouth open from ear to ear, and then lopped those same ears off. And at that point he said, "Didn't the children plead with you in just the same way?" I had to listen to the screams of that nobleman dying by inches for another 10 minutes or more. That's when I thought, maybe Dee was really a noble in disguise. If not, I don't see how he could have killed that nobleman so brutally, no matter how many kids had fallen victim to him. Compared to that, getting bit by a noble would have been a walk in the park. I felt like even though I was in the same line of work as him, there was no way I could ever surpass Dee. Hell, I was scared just to be with him. I mean, what if I ended up having to fight him? And so I quit being a hunter. At some point, the man had started trembling, and Louise noticed that the two of them were touching. Normally, she'd have left it at that, but out there on the plains with the lashing rain, Louise felt like they were the only two people in the whole world. "We should..." The words just came out of her. JJ looked at her strangely. By that point, her body, which had been leaning toward him, was bolt upright again. "Watch it," JJ said sharply. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be so." "It's not that. Just now, I heard a cry from up above us. Something not quite bird or beast. It's one of those things Dee and I cut down. Sinister's lackeys, eh? More like the perfect assassin. Take the reins. I'm gonna pop inside." "That's my job," Louise exclaimed, looking up at the ashen sky, then quickly heading for the hatch. "Here it comes. Hit the deck." And by the time JJ's cry rang out, a ferocious impact made the stagecoach tilt. Wildly, and Louise was sent sailing through the air like a leaf of a tree. Chapter 4 End.